Thank you very much for coming today. I'm sorry I have to speak in English language because of our guest, but you can switch. You have your translation equipment, but switch to number 2. That will be in your language, okay? Today is the second lecture of the guest speaker series of PPGL Spring Semester. And it is my pleasure to invite and to welcome Mr. Erik Akse, which is he is an international team leader in the support policy development project supporting the Office of Prime Minister of the Republic of Kosovo. The project is financed by SIDA, Swedish International Development Agency, and it is being implemented by Public Administration International. Mr. Akse has graciously agreed to speak to us today, and I think this is a great opportunity for you to learn more about the project and to see the benefits that you might have as policymakers. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Akse. After his short presentation, the Q&A session will be followed and will be facilitated by Professor Mentoni. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Indeed, Erik Akse is my name. I'm now working since July in Kosovo, and I feel very comfortable working in the country. One of the things already now, an introduction being done in English, while it's done specifically for me, I find it very nice honor to see how people are treating, how welcoming you all are in your own country to people like me. I'm going to talk to you today about challenges for improving the policy development process. What are the issues that are facing, that countries are facing, Kosovo in particular, but actually not just Kosovo, many other countries in the world, and focusing on what can be done better. We have that focus on what can be done better because the project that I'm running currently within the Office of the Prime Minister is, of course, has the aim to do things eventually better. I have the mouse lying here, so we'll need to go here to click and change the slide. I can fully understand that some of you, maybe all of you, are quite eagerly waiting on the ping on your phone for kind of news update what's happening in the Parliament. But I would really, really appreciate if you could take your phone, have a final look at this moment, put it on flight mode, and check again after the presentation what actually has been going on in the Parliament in that coming half an hour, 45 minutes. Thank you. First, a little bit about myself. Why am I standing here? I've been working now in a field that's called better regulation since 2002. Better regulation includes everything from impact assessment evaluations for the ex-ante policy analysis and ex-post policy analysis. What do you analyze before the government takes a decision, and how do you actually assess the added value of existing legislation, existing policies, but also consultation, involvement of stakeholders in the decision-making process, and administrative burden reduction, looking at what kind of costs does legislation cause, but not on the side of the government, it's cost to the budget, but the cost on the side of citizens and companies. Because when you look at legislation in the full picture, full societal costs, in the end it's of course the administration that implements something, but companies need to feel informed, they need to oblige with the obligations, US citizens need to apply for passports, whatever kind of forms and permits for changing a building, building a house and things like that. That's demonstrated burden reduction about reducing societal costs and making legislation far more efficient. I did that for 4 years in the Netherlands. Then I moved to Brussels. I started working for the European Commission as a so-called national expert. Welcome, welcome. There are some places. In the back there's still something up. Yes, you can just walk along here. I worked 5 years nearly at the European Commission on the regulation agenda of the EU, impact assessment, evaluation, and the burden reduction again. Specifically running a business consultation tool. So when the Commission was working on a proposal that affected companies in particular, developing questionnaires, sending them out to companies to see what kind of feeling they had, what kind of issues they were dealing with on a day-to-day basis with European legislation, and how European legislation could be amended and improved to make their life better and easier. In 2011, I left the Commission, and since then, I've been working as a freelancer. I work a lot for an organization called Sigma. It's a part for those who do not know Sigma. It's a part of the OECD, and they provide a lot of technical support, technical assistance in the Western Balkans. I also worked a little bit for the UNDP. I worked for SIGA before, and now again under this project. I went for example also to Poland, trained more than 200 people there on how to work with EU impact assessment. And that's linked to, I hope you can see it in the back as well, 2 publications that I have on my name so far. There's a 3rd one coming up. I hope it will be ready by the summer. I focus very much on the practicalities of policy development. So I wrote a book on EU impact assessment. How does the process run? Just in a nutshell, it's 1.5 years of analytical work that the Commission does. How to work with it when you are officials from a member state or future member state, and how to work with it when you are lobbyists in Brussels. Very practical information. That's where I like working in, where ideas of improving policy development actually hit reality. And then publication on which I would call the rules of procedure of the European Union, how the Parliament, the European Commission, how to work together, how does European legislation actually come officially into existence. In addition to that, I founded the Impact Assessment Institute. We assess the quality of impact assessments of the European Commission independently. And in addition to that, we are promoting better regulation principles all around Europe and practically also around the world. But that's enough about me. This is about the project that we are working on within the Office of the Prime Minister. As Ilmarina already mentioned, it's funded by the Swedish Development Cooperation Agency. And if you see how this project is structured, I think it's very nice best practice. First of all, there's really an official agreement between Kosovo and Sweden. I think any kind of work with the administration should be based on an agreement like that. An official recognition that there's going to be cooperation between 2 countries or Kosovo and its counterpart. There's an extensive results framework, as I call it on a project like this. What are we supposed to achieve at the end of the project? I'm not going to explain all the details, there's not enough time for that, but it's very concrete targets that we're supposed to work against. Assessment of our progress is covered by an evaluation, an independent evaluation, in the middle of the project and at the end. Plus, there are several indicators that we're working with. It's Sigma indicators, the organization that I was talking about before. They come into Kosovo and the other countries in the region every 2 years and make an assessment of how good the administration is functioning. And those indicators are also for us the goal, so to speak, for improvement, to make sure that Kosovo does go up in those rankings. There's a very broad direct support within the Office of the Prime Minister. And as you can see it here, we have 4 offices mentioned there. It's first of all the Government Coordination Secretariat, where the bulk of the people are present, 5 of the 8. But also the Strategic Planning Office, and the Legal Office, and the Public Communication Office. And that's because policy development is not the work of one person or even 2. It's the work of an entire organization. It's the work of the entire government. And that's what I like about this, is that when this project was being prepared, that this was duly recognized. And therefore, very broad support within the OPM. If you look at the impact, yes, we are sitting, me and my team, within the Office of the Prime Minister, but in the end, it's all line ministries that will feel the impact from that. We are working on a new guideline for policy development, new tools for policy analysis, for example. And who needs to work with that? It's those people developing the policies, which means officials in line ministries, who of course not for nothing and then called policy officials. We have 8 experts for 4 years. Again, when I look at many support projects, 8 experts for such a long time is quite a lot. And I'm especially happy with this because 4 years is more or less the time you need to improve policy development in any kind of organization. Just as a rough comparison, the European Commission changes its own approach to impact assessment and policy analysis about every 5 years. You cannot, of course, one-on-one compare those things, but you see in many countries that 4 or 5 years is normally the cycle they go through, assess what they've done in the past, introduce improvements, after several years again, see whether those improvements work, and then see how you can further improve. And then there's direct budget support from Sweden to the Office of the Prime Minister, which means that I'm not taking decisions on where workshops are going to be held, who is going to, what kind of training. All those decisions are practically devolved and put into the OPM, which is again a very different setup that you hear very often in projects like this. Very often it's the consultancy that covers everything, practically buying the tickets, organizing the lunch, for example. These are all activities that the Office of the Prime Minister has to cover. So it's the budget department within the organization, the human resource department, it's all these internal structures within the office that need to make sure that this project works. Yes. What is project design? I already dropped some hints before. When you look at improving policy development, you can summarize it by saying it's changing the administration on all levels. It covers, and I hope you can actually, probably not read it in the back, so I will just read it out loud. It's a strategic planning of the government. What does the government want to achieve in 3, 5, maybe 10 or 15 years for the country? Why is that relevant? Strategic planning feeds into the work planning. What is a ministry going to do next year or the year after? What kind of legislation do you need to develop? If you want to develop legislation, what kind of analysis do you need to do? How are you going to inform stakeholders that there will be consultations coming in? Very practical work you need to do a proper impact analysis of the suggestions, the changes that you're going to propose. If you want to make legislation work, you have to have the budget for that. Also that you need to reserve. If you are now say, okay, we want to invest so many millions into a new road. It's a good idea, but do you have the money actually 2 years from now, or not? It's about communicating and knowing what you want to communicate, not just during the development of the policy, but especially also when you want to implement it. Those that need to work with legislation. Citizens like you that actually are supposed to feel benefits, the added value of changes that are being introduced through legislation and policies, it's good to know what it is about. If something becomes more difficult, it's very good to know why. If something becomes easier, it's also good to actually stress that. Because in the end, an administration is there to serve the country. And a good administration, and you see it all over the world, a good administration is a very important factor for economic, social development in any kind of country. It's about implementing legislation. Do you know what you need to do when you're developing a proposal, a new suggestion for the government to adopt? Do you know what you actually need to do to make that work in practice? Which kind of organizations within the administration need to get working? Do they have the capacities? Do they have sufficient staff? Are they aware that these changes are coming? Very practical issues to be covered. Then when you have a good idea, it's good to test that idea after it has been implemented. You do the policy analysis before for the proposal. Once you have implemented it, you wait a few years and see, okay, did everything you actually wanted to do? Did it materialize? Did the benefits that you wanted to achieve actually show in real life? And then you talk about evaluating them. Checking whether all the assumptions that were made before, whether the expectations that were created were actually met. And based upon the evaluation, it's again about improving legislation. Policy development covers all these and actually more aspects. And that's the big challenge. And if you just sum this up, this involves every organization within the administration. From the Office of the Prime Minister to the Ministry of Finance, to line ministries, to whoever is responsible for implementing legislation, from the agencies, municipalities, or others. Message, challenge, and therefore number one. It's also about changing the nature of decision making. And that is one thing that is important to realize. That policy development does not talk about developing laws. And I have this point in here, law is an option. A law can be used to improve society, absolutely. And very often may also be absolutely necessary to set standards, for example. But there are many other ways through which behavior companies can be changed, subsidies, tax incentives, and others, which might be far more effective, which might be far less costly, for example. And this is, I would nearly say, a regional issue, and maybe even a global issue. Because a lot of people that develop laws or develop policies, they come from a legal background. And they've always been told, and I also had it in the Netherlands, I saw it very clearly, that people said, yes, we need to change the law. Why? Because we want to achieve that, for example, the soil in the Netherlands is not polluted as much because we have a lot of people, a lot of farmers rearing cows, for example. It's a very practical thing. So we changed the law, we put in new limits for pollution. But then the first question was, well, did you discuss it with the farmers' organizations? And I said, no, not yet. So, but maybe there are different ways to achieve it. Maybe you can find an agreement with them. You can still monitor it. There's no issue. But law is only one option. It doesn't have to be the only one. It's about analysis and consultation first. And there you will also touch upon political issues. Again, I'm using some examples from the Netherlands, but at the moment there is an accident happening. We had it a while ago where a balcony dropped and 2 people died. It was on, I think, the 4th floor in the south of the country. The first reaction was, we need to improve the legislation. But then I said, let's first do the analysis. And improve the legislation was not the issue at all. It was simply, unfortunately, for the people, of course, that were involved, it was a building company that just flouted the roof. They just ignored the standards, and then you got the casualties coming from that. Analysis and consultation. If you would have jumped into this reaction, you need to adopt to change the law, because an accident happened, would not have changed the situation at all. It's about decisions based on evidence and future projections. And that, even though we do it a lot on a daily basis, when you buy a car, when you buy a house, when you get married, even when you go to a restaurant, so to speak, you make these decisions all the time. For policies, they become very complex and very broad, and therefore more difficult to handle. But it's a natural process. It's something that a human does on a daily basis. But to instill this within an organization, to have people follow your analysis, to have people read what the team, a working group, for example, did develop, having discussions based upon the data, and not on preferences or a gut feeling, that affects again the entire administration. That means that people also need to respect the work that others do. That when you draft something, somebody else reads it, comes to you and says, okay, let's discuss it. It sounds like a very basic thing, but I've seen it not just in the region, I've seen it in the Commission as well, I've seen it in the Netherlands as well. When you come up with a big report, people say, oh, I don't have time for that. So it's the way that you actually structure this kind of communication within the administration on policy development that helps you make sure that decisions are being based on evidence. And that people do get into the details that are relevant for them, but maybe not into a document of 120 pages that you sorted out everything as much as you could. The second is number 3, and that's a source of relevant knowledge. And here I am very, very happy, very content with how the project I'm running is going. Just to give you an indication of what the discussion was before, the idea was to have 2 international experts and 2 Kosovo experts involved in this project. In the end, and it was very, very useful decision from the Kosovo side, they said that no, you have 1 international expert and we will have 7 people from Kosovo working on this project. And that will be the project team. And for me, I think this is a golden combination. If I just see how difficult it is for me to understand all the intrinsities, all the histories in the administration, who has been working where, what kind of projects have been developed within what kind of ministry, I would need several years to understand that in detail. And now I have 7 people that very quickly put connections there. They call, they know, they've seen what actually happened. That was developed in a ministry 3 years ago. And that gives us, if I can call it like that, like the power and the energy to very quickly decide on things, to very quickly connect to the relevant people within the relevant organizations. And that's for me a golden combination. Another challenge is that de facto you have an unlimited amount of possibilities for policy analysis. And one of the risks you run is that you do more analysis and more because you want to have ever more detail, so then you don't take the decision. In a proper policy development system, with proper policy analysis, you need to decide what are you going to do and what not. And that can be a very difficult decision as such. Because what's relevant for me might not be relevant for you and vice versa. What is relevant for a certain line ministry to look into might be different than for a counterpart, somebody in another ministry. I have here a practical joke to illustrate how that works, because there are 2 people sitting together and they say, let's take longer to pick the movie than it would take to watch it. That's a practical thing you can have, because proper analysis takes time, but at the same time, You want to make sure that things improve and change. If you analyze something for 2 years, you might say like, well, why should we then still develop a law if we need so much time to actually find out what we need to do? So you need to have a proper balance on what you actually want to do, or which things you want to look in more detail into what you should be regulating, should be doing. It's quite a practical issue to be solved, and it's also something we will be working on, of course. What are achievements and ambitions that we have in there? I might use some terminology, some jargon, and I already apologize for that. But that's when you catch and you're working in the field for quite a while. We have specifically set up the ambitions under this project, not just in this agreement between Kosovo and Sweden, but also in the Better Regulation Strategy 2.0. You can find this one on the website of the Office of the Prime Minister. And why was this done? To put it really properly into the policy development framework, the strategic framework for policies in Kosovo. If you look at it, improving policy development, practically what are we going to do? I listed 3 main points. First of all, build a solid foundation. This simply comes down to having guidelines. Guidelines that are easy to understand, easy to read, and therefore easy to apply. Now, I hope that they will be easy to read, understand, and apply. And that's our aim. So then we're going to be testing that quite rigorously with the people that eventually will have to apply them. So the 9 ministries, and also stakeholders outside that would like to be involved in policy development in Kosovo. And a lot of capacity development practically means training. Training, coaching, mentoring for people in the 9 ministries that are developing policies, that are developing, as they call, concept documents in Kosovo. To see that they can call us, they can come to us, that they can discuss. We maybe have some ideas of what we might be able to do. Can you help us with the consultation process, very practical capacity development and support. And that leads then to the application of it, because once you have developed guidelines, once you have trained people, it doesn't stop there. It's actually only the start. Then you need to apply and apply and apply what you have been building and been setting up. When you look at what we're going to do under this broad policy analysis, which can include more or less everything, we're going to focus on gender equality. Can we develop a practical guide for policy officials in the 9 ministries when they're coming up with ideas for legislation to take gender equality better into account? What are the trigger factors, so to speak, that should tell you whether or not gender equality is an issue? We're going to apply the standard cost model. This is about the administrative burden reduction that I was telling you at the beginning, that I've been working on in the Netherlands and on EU level as well. This is the model through which we calculate more or less what the legislation will cost to companies. When you know that cost, you can use it much better in evaluating whether the legislation is worth it or not. There's an SME test, small and medium-sized enterprises. When you look at legislation in every country, everywhere around the world, who is most burdened by it? It's the small companies. Practically, it comes down to large companies having legal departments, budget departments, finance departments, highly trained professionals that are very well equipped to deal with legislation, enforce it, implement it. An average owner, employer in a small company, they're there to do their business. As the British would say, the business of business is business. I'm not sure whether that translates properly into your languages, but they want to do their work. They're not trained to fill forms. They're not trained to measure things, for example. So how do you make sure that legislation does not block, does not hinder those small companies? And that's what it's an SME test. It's very much about reaching out, talking to people, making sure that people within the administration that potentially have never run a company understand what a company has to deal with in real life. And then the fourth one, there are more. The fourth one here is a regulatory competitiveness check. When you want to set standards in legislation, you need to have information. And one of the most practical information you can get is from countries around you. And by simply asking yourself, what does Croatia do in this region, in this area? How often do they ask for certain donations? Do they ask it every 3 years, 5 years, 6 years? And if you have this information, what should apply to Kosovo? This is also evidence-based. This is a good indicator for how you might set the specific standards in your legislation. So that's something you also would like to see happening more and in more depth. It's about improving consultation and policy communication. And I put them in one line because they go perfectly together. If you want to consult, if you want to have input from stakeholders, from municipalities, from companies, from citizens, from NGOs, when you're developing a new policy proposal, you need to, at the same time, communicate this effectively as well. You see, sometimes, actually too often if I may say it like that a consultation process is about a thick document. It can be literally hundreds of pages. And not specifically referring to Kosovo, European Commission, you see it as well. Because you're talking sometimes about very complex issues. And yes, there is a lot of analysis behind it. But how do you convince, for example, a small company to invest half a day in reading this? It's about communicating why something is happening. That's why public consultation and policy communication need to go hand in hand. And it has to be an integral part of the policy development process. Not just when you are coming up with ideas, also once it's implemented, and also when it's again being evaluated. And then improving work planning of the government, why is this relevant? Policy analysis takes time. The concept document in Kosovo takes about 6 to 9 months if you want to do it properly. If you don't have the time, if there's a political deadline, if there's a deadline in any kind of document, if there's a deadline set by organizations that would like to support you, but please needs to be finished by July, so to speak. You condense, you shorten the time you need for policy analysis. And the shorter the time you have, and you can just look at yourself, if you are supposed to draft minutes of a meeting within half an hour, or somebody says, no, you have half a day to actually draft the minutes of the meeting. It's very easy. The shorter the time you have, the less quality you're able to provide. That applies to individuals, that applies to processes like policy development and policy analysis as well. So those are our achievements and ambitions in there. Before I go to the next slide, I would like to ask, I'm actually going to appoint 6 volunteers just to come forward. Because I'm talking about what we're doing in Kosovo. But I would like to see what you think, how your country is doing on a regional scale. And I'm putting 5 numbers there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. These numbers represent evidence-based policy development. And it's an indicator that is used by this organization, Sigma, to assess countries in the region. Now I would like the 6 people that I'm going to give a pen, first 3 and 3 after, just to go forward and indicate what they think where Kosovo and other countries in the region are actually scoring. So I will give this pen to you. Please can you put Kosovo in this overview. And if somebody, yes, If somebody would like to help, go ahead. Because I don't see this as a score of individuals here, it's the group that is involved in that. Can I give this one to you? And can you put Bosnia and Herzegovina on that scale? Where do you think Bosnia and Herzegovina scores on the level 1 to 5? In policy development. 5 being great, 1 being not good at all. Go ahead, that's what it is. Can I ask you to put Albania in this overview? Where do you think Albania's scoring in terms of the quality of policy development in the country? 5 is being really, really good. 1 is not good at all. Do you have any question here?
Yes. Can you explain me what
No, for policy development. The system of policy development in the entire country. What do you think, how good they score? 1 is not good. 5 is very good. Bosnia and Herzegovina. You put it Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah. I'm always very appreciative of people that actually are cooperating in activities like this. So thank you very much. Kosovo 4, Bosnia 3. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Albania is better than. Okay, pardon. Okay. Albania getting maximum scores. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to move on here now. I don't see any people with tears in their eyes or something like this. Please ask me, Montenegro, how good do you think Montenegro scores in policy development? Can I ask you to put Macedonia in this overview as well? How good do you think they are? Just squeeze. So we're still missing one country? Can you put Serbia in this overview? How well do those other countries score on a regional comparison base, the quality of their administration and policy development? Macedonia on screen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The Montenegro score.
Se pravi, ok, čeveritna, ki je preveč molizija, da še prav.
I find these reality checks very relevant, very important, because when you talk about improving something, the first thing you focus on is things that need to be improved, and therefore things that are not going right, that are being done wrong. But it sets the tone in the discussion, which, yes, it might be necessary, but it might not be the correct one. So it's good to just reflect on the things that you're discussing. Thank you very much for all the 6 for your contributions. I find this really, really nice to see, because this corresponds to what I often see in here. Albania on top, with the sentence, oh, Albania, they're doing things better. This is, as I said, this I heard several times already. But I'm going to just show you how this picture of the sigma indicator looks like. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a 1. They're scoring the least in the region. Albania is a 2. So they're not better than Kosovo. They're not better than Kosovo in policy development. And I just put the number 4. Kosovo, Serbia, Macedonia, Montenegro, all scored 3. There's nobody with a 5 in the region, nobody with a 4 in the region. What does it tell you? You're not doing bad. You do play in the top league, but the top league needs to improve still. Keep that in mind also when I'm telling you here what is going, well, what are we going to work on, what is not functioning, what are the challenges. There is a clear basis. There is a clear basis for Kosovo to do better. What they're already doing is quite okay on many levels. And when I say this needs to improve, this needs to be done better, keep that in mind. You're not starting from scratch. Why this approach again? What is difficult in policy development and improving it is that so many actors involved. So we mentioned that the implementation, policy development, everything, so many levels in the administration. What is really important from our side, the project that we're running, the cooperation that we have with the Office of Prime Minister, that people know what's going to happen. We communicate things, that we discuss things first before we adopt important decisions. This is what I mentioned before, the communication within the administration. New analytical tools put in new demands, then cost modeling, competitiveness checks, SME tests. There's a new approach. Just like having a new subject at the university course or at the training, people start with 0 or limited knowledge, most of them at least. So you need to get that across. And you don't do that with just the training, you do that with helping people, assisting them in applying this kind of tools, and making sure that they understand the demands, that they feel eventually comfortable with those demands. And as I mentioned before, better analysis and consultation demand more time. So we need to make sure that any kind of planning, work planning of the government, work planning of the ministries, that there is sufficient time reserved for it. That we really do get the resources, time resources, to be able to do proper analysis. That stakeholders do get the information on time. That they know several months in advance that the consultation might be coming up, that they do get an email. It's very practical things, but you need to organize it. But do get an email on time that there will be a conference held, for example. And that there is time on the side of the administration to analyze what stakeholders have been providing in terms of information. And that there's possibility also to respond to that in detail. I feel that the time is pressing a little bit. So I have here my last slide. See Darth Vader there, keep calm and use the force. What's the force in policy development? It's 2, it's your brain, it's your heart. What kind of policies you develop as a country, define what kind of country, what kind of future there is. And since it's about the future, it's good to take time for it. And if people sit together, policies do become better. You can have very tough discussions, very big disagreements between people, but when they find eventually a line to take, you'll see that it's to the benefit of everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much again for the 6 volunteers to come up and actually fill this overview. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, thank you so much.
Dita, Oriental Limani, qui est du client station du directeur, pour lequel je smerse rotier. Nasze procesy im budget. Und facilitare mai budget acte personne jo budget de jour chipe projekteert en dus regionale precision. Dus het was ook schon vor volontair. Kielinga Jakova, Kielinga Dushani, Kielinga Shreya, Kielinga Skenderai, Kielinga Shkina. Kritiska Fragen, Bedenken, Unruhen, also Kampagnen der Corona, vielleicht nur in der Liga, was ist dran?
Имам величини потоку, роми спријатно за нешански срок, за инфекции трайни и продолжа. Ключе има за дишвихил. Не за четвртим се инвестиме да јаш послова по-шум се да речемо познато шамбо на Македонија да се. Се на тоа рита бе политика публика на земја. Се
Presenčene bi komunës Prishtinës. Unë mbështet mendimin po thonë se Kosova qëndronjë në politika publike, por ne kemi mendimin se Kosova po paradon duke pas parasysh procesin e dëshmuar privatizimit keq menaxhimin e ndërmarrjeve shoqërore, ndërkohë të punit ka zëra se Kosova nuk do të mund të paguaj më punëkryesit në autostradë. Edhe një penalizim i mundshëm duke pas parasysh penalizimet e mëhershme do të ishte katastrofale për Kosovën në gjykatën arbitrare.
Wonderful questions, I love that. Thank you very much, thank you very much. Why does Kosovo not develop better policies? If I just go back to this overview again, you have very long established administrations that are not doing better than you. That are not doing better than Kosovo is doing. And how old is your administration? Compared to Serbia and Montenegro, they have a much longer tradition. Albania also has a much longer tradition of running the entire central administration. This brings a little bit back to what kind of expectations do you have? For me, you're doing quite well in comparison to others. That you would say, like, well, we'd like to have better results. We'd like to have much better policies coming out of it, and seeing that support translates to much better outputs and outcomes. That I can fully relate to. And that's where the difference between 3 and 5, like I say so bureaucratically, so to speak, technically, comes in. Explaining this indicator a little bit more, if you are in 3, it means you have processes established for policy analysis and policy development. But the content still needs to improve. And that's where we are for 4 years with 8 people, to make sure that the content improves and that then the score improves, and eventually also the quality of policies, quality of legislation, the impact of policies and legislation will improve in Kosovo as well. When you talk about facing specific problems in implementing legislation decisions, there's no money for something. I come back to the same overview. And you come back to evaluating decisions that you have been taking into account what I call the entire policy cycle. Not just taking a decision and then see how it materializes, coming back after several years to see how it's being implemented, how it's actually adding value or not to society. You have a very specific approach to this, then budget impact assessment or fiscal impact assessment. What does the proposal cost to the budget? And Minister of Finance is of course involved in that. And you come down to a very simple question, do we have money for it or not? If that process is not done in detail enough, then you run into implementation issues like that. It's not about having 1,000 euros here, 1,000 euros there for an organization. Especially roads take a lot of money. They take a lot of time. If you need to plan for it, if you need to reserve the land, disown people, buy them out, things like that. Again, a little bit technical. If you're on 3, it means that this process is not done into the detail that it should be done. It is there, and the Minister of Finance does have the role, and calculations are being made, but whether those calculations are in detail enough, but also whether the projections, and then I'm coming to something more complex that I'm not dealing with myself, the projections in 2 or 3 years ahead, is there indeed sufficient budget for it? And if you have an issue that suddenly there's a budget cut, then of course you need to integrate that again into the policy that you want to implement. That can be very difficult things to do. And if you use infrastructure projects as a benchmark, I would like just to remind here everybody that I haven't seen many countries in the world that can plan infrastructure projects, implement them, and all the time. There are only a few in the world that are doing so. If I look at infrastructure projects in the Netherlands, they're normally over time, and very often also over budget. But that's something that's really difficult, apparently, to plan in advance. So if you use it as a benchmark here in Kosovo, please look also at other countries. Maybe it's the type of investment and all the work that is linked to it that makes it just very difficult to do that on time. Are there any more questions for that?
Përshëndetje nga profesor Imani, gjithashtu përshëndetje nga mysafirë. Pyetja ime ka të bëjë pikërisht profesori Ceku që zhvillimi politik ka bazuar në dëshminë. Atër programi ka aty i BE-s që përfshin përfundime ka 2020. U sektori në zhvillimit socioekonomik ka përkrahur 30%. Në anën tjetër, Kosova ka ballafaqohet me një marrëprim të popullsisë për 52%. Dhe kush përparësia politika të BE-s për krah zhvillimit të projekteve në këtë sektor, veçanërisht për fundimin dhe ngritjen e fundimit të rinisë. Në aspektin tjetër, është ndjecja e zhvillimit të politikave të Kosovës, veçanërisht për ta ulur, për ta ngritur këtë përparësi të popullsisë, pra në uljen e varfërisë, është fjala. Se kemi një antagonizëm në mes të politikave që përkrah BE-ja, për zonamin tjetër kemi një ndjecje drejt për drejt të zhvillimit të projekteve në këtë fushë, për ta ulur varfërinë në Kosovë. Kjo është pyetja ime. Faleminderit.
Përshëndetje, me qenë se jemi në mesin në numërin 3, kuadre me shtete tjera si Shqipëria dhe Bosna, pse Kosova ka mbjec mos liberalizimin e vizave, Rinia ka mbjek mbrapa, mos shakuvimi i tyre i lëshëm.
Well, the last, I can imagine the last question that it's something that's very pertinent and relevant for you. I have a very easy answer. Policy development is not the only thing linked to it. And I think you probably understand much better than I, all the issues that are linked to visa liberalization for the country. I hope personally to get it as soon as possible. But let's see how those things are going. Poverty alleviation. So a very nice question. How do projects aimed at reducing poverty, how do they link into policy development? And practically, in this room, there's nobody else that knows better how to solve the issues than you. I can come in and tell you how policy development can be structured, how it's done, in the end, all my ideas are being tested first of all by my own team, and then within the Office of the Prime Minister saying, okay, this makes sense, here, Erik, forget about it, think of demand too much, no, you have to adjust this, because this is the way that we prefer to work. Any kind of policy, any kind of legislation, proposal we develop, that's the energy, that's the process we need to have. So when you talk about programs to alleviate poverty, for example, what does work in Kosovo? Does, for example, as I was mentioning before, gender equality, is that a lack of that? Is that a reason for poverty? If yes, you need to analyze it. You need to look into that and see where the drivers are. Why does poverty persist?